Hello and welcome to another lesson in reading and listening comprehension. Today we're going to look at comprehending fiction through character and characterization. Here lately we've been going through the elements of fiction in order to be able to understand how to comprehend the explicit and implicit meaning of fiction, particularly with short stories. So let's get started. First, we're going to give you a review of the last lesson. Actual readers do not know the real author. True or false? An author and a narrator are the same. True or false? What is a naive narrator? What kind of narrator knows everything? An unreliable and naive narrator is the same thing. Next up, here are the answers. Number 1 is true. We actually know, so the readers have an idea or the implied author. They perceive who the author is through their characters or through the narrator, right? So we don't actually know who these people actually are because we don't meet them directly. Rather, we meet them through their characters. We meet them through the minds that they have created within their story. So we don't know the actual author, but we do know the implied author. And it's the same when an author writes a story to people he doesn't actually know, but people that he pictures knowing, right? He writes to an intended audience, but that intended audience, he doesn't know every single reader who will read his story. So an author and a narrator are the same. That is false. The narrator is created by the author to tell the story. A naive narrator is one who does not understand the significance of the story he or she is telling. And that means number 5 is false. An unreliable narrator can be a third-person omniscient or a third-person limited omniscient narrator who chooses not to tell, right? Or a first-person narrator even who chooses not to tell the truth on purpose, intentionally trying to deceive the readers. However, a naive narrator is also unreliable because they don't actually understand the significance of the story they're telling, so we can't truly rely on them for all the facts. We have to, as the readers, analyze the details that we know and put together our own idea of what the story means because the narrator in the naive case does not actually understand what they're talking about. So they're telling us details, they're telling us things that are happening, but they don't really know. It's kind of like a child describing his parents who are going through a very difficult situation that the child does not know. He can just tell us what he sees, but we, the readers, those of us who are adults and have been through such situations, will know much better than the child would in the story. So very complicated, but makes fiction very, very interesting. Number 4, what kind of narrator knows everything? The third person omniscient. This is basically God mode narrator. All right, let's move on. So definitions you were going to need for this lesson. Character is a created person in a novel, play, movie, story, etc. Anything to do with fiction. Characterization is the process of creating a character. All right, so we go through characterization when we make any kind of character within a story. So I want you guys to watch this video, A New Hero. It's a featurette turned out before Fantastic Beasts, and it has a lot to do with the author, J.K. Rowling, talking about what she thinks of Newt and how he came about in her creation process. So go ahead and watch the video, answer these questions, and we'll talk about characterization.
My heroes are always people who feel themselves to be set apart, stigmatized, or othered. That's at the heart of most of what I write, and it's certainly at the heart of this movie. Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them was a textbook that Harry Potter used at school. While I was writing Potter, I became quite interested in Newt Scamander. So I knew quite a lot about Newt. He's been traveling the world studying magical creatures. He calls himself a magizoologist.
First trip to America?
Yes. Must get that fixed.
Newt's creatures live in this magical case. You open it up, you can go down. It's an amazing space.
Newt feels more at home with creatures than he does with human beings. Come on, give me a smile.
Newt walks into a society he doesn't really understand.
Mr. Scamander, do you know anything about the wizarding community in America?
I know that you have rather backwards laws about relations with non-magic people. That you're not meant to befriend them, you can't marry them, which seems wildly absurd to me.
Then marry him.
Okay, so characterization is when the author begins with an idea of a person they already know. So maybe you know Uncle Bob or somebody in your family, and you're going to make a character based off of the idea of him. You're going to make something that serves, a character that serves in your story, right? Some authors say the development of a character is led by the character itself. They talk about the character as if they are living people, and we see that a little bit in this video with J.K. Rowling. She says, when I met Newt, it's very interesting. And J.K. Rowling is known for doing this with many of her characters. The purpose of every character is to move the story forward, but you can either write the story and then design the characters to fulfill that story, or you design the characters and watch how it plays out. This is a popular way to play many role-playing games in especially American culture, but it happens all around the world. The most famous example I would think of is Dungeons and Dragons. This is a very classic, very, very nerdy thing, but the idea is you create a bunch of characters, you have a basic outline of a story of situations that are going to happen and creatures they're going to meet, but the story is determined by how the characters develop in reaction to these, and they roll dice and to give it some random elements as well. But that's the idea, is the characterization has a role to play, a major role to play, if not the major role to play in creating the story. So very interesting here, and we see J.K. Rowling talking like that here briefly. So the answers to these questions are, what does she say about the character Newt? He is brilliant. He is very socially awkward. He's out of his element in America's wizarding world, and he's most comfortable with the magical beasts he collects. She met Newt. That's how she says he was developed. He was mentioned in off to the side in some of the Harry Potter books, the original series, but she really fixated on him, and she met him. She decided what he was going to be like based off of how he was mentioned in the original books. So it's very interesting that she met him and talks about him as if he's an actual human being. Newt protects the magical beast he finds by collecting him. That's what set off the whole spin-off series from Harry Potter. So fiction character types. Let's talk about different character types, as this is going to help us be able to understand how to comprehend something in various ways. And we're going to look at that here after we look at the different hero types. So we have a hero or a heroine. Heroine is female. They're the stereotypical good guy. In early literature, particularly English literature, your good guy is all good, and your bad guy is all bad. It's all black and white. Okay, you can see a more modern example of this with Superman. Yes, his technical weakness is kryptonite, but Superman is a very apparently morally good guy, and he doesn't make very many mistakes. And when he does make a mistake, I mean, it's all situational, and he owns up to it, and he's just a good all-around guy, right? So a classic hero, very few, if no weaknesses. King Arthur is a good example of this. He is extremely moral, extremely kind, extremely good-hearted, and he is out to serve the people of his kingdom in the best way possible. So you see this a lot in early literature, but you don't see it in newer literature for multiple reasons that we will get to when we get to the later periods of literature. Anti-heroes. Anti-heroes is a character who is the least likely possible to be able to be a hero in the story. So a classic example of this is Captain Jack Sparrow from the Pirates of the Caribbean movies. This guy is, I mean, he's a drunk. He's incredibly selfish. He is a womanizer. He is just an awful human being by all counts, but he ends up being the hero somehow. So very interesting character type here. Anti-heroes are very, very, very common in modern literature. Again, we're going to see these more and more in future stories. The protagonist versus the antagonist. So a protagonist is going to be the main character, while the antagonist is going to be the main enemy or the main situation that the protagonist struggles with. Okay, so the The antagonist can be an internal struggle. It can be a physical person. It could be a situation, like it could be a war that's going on around. Whatever it is, there's going to be something that makes the protagonist struggle and grow. And that's usually the plot line of a movie. So there's going to be this person that you are introduced to at the beginning, and something happens. Some complication happens, and that's what makes the story interesting. So here you have the classic example of Harry Potter and Lord Voldemort. These would be the protagonist and antagonist in this series. Round versus flat. A round character is a well-developed, deep character that changes in the story. There are very few of these in a short story, okay? It is imperative that you understand that round characters, we know a lot. We know their mind. We know their history. We know where they're going. We see them change and develop. But in a short story, time is restricted. Space for the story is restricted, which means you're not going to be able to work through an entire origin story in addition to elements that are happening, in addition to another set of elements, in addition to other characters impacting that character. You're not going to do that in a short story. So in a short story, we're looking for the main character that gets the most attention, and that will likely be the one that we're going to see change. Ideally, you're looking for somebody that changes, whether they come to a new decision, whether they come to a new understanding of something, whether they have an epiphany, or whether they physically change. Something is going to change. Some lesson is going to be learned, and that makes a character round. On the other hand, you have a flat character. A flat character is one that just doesn't change. They're known for one or two traits, particularly in short stories. Maybe you hear that Uncle Bob is the character's uncle and he says one thing in the story, that's it. They do not change. You do not see much about them. You might see them multiple times, but it might be like a waiter coming in to serve the food, and they might say something and then they go out, and then they come back and they say something and they clean things and then they go out, but they don't change. Okay, that is very, very important that you understand the difference between round and flat. Examples here from American cinema would be Iron Man. He changes a lot in the Marvel movies, correct? So much development happens in this character. Whereas with Agent Carson, not much changes with him at all. Now there's a TV series that spins off later, but Agent Carson himself does not change very much. So he is considered a flat character. Foil characters. Okay, a foil character, their purpose is to complement or contrast the main character's qualities. So in the case of Harry Potter and that series, you have Harry Potter being a good wizard who's genuinely concerned about the people around him, who just really cares for people, and he wants to get better so that he can better protect them. Whereas you have Malfoy, who he's just a punk. He's a rich punk that wants to get at Harry for no particular reason other than, we find out later, his own purposes and his selfishness and his bad father relationship, right? So you have a lot of things happening, but Malfoy throughout the series is very selfish. He's very self-centered, and he's learning magic and using magic for his own purposes, where Harry is doing things for others. So he is a contrast foil character. Again, these characters do not change very much. And their whole purpose is the whole purpose of being in the story is to help make the main character more round, or the main antagonist or bad guy more round. They help develop the other people, but they themselves do not really change. Okay, identifying character types, purpose. The purpose of identifying character types is that fiction comprehension is so much easier once you identify the character types. It helps you narrow down the options to the most important characters. It identifies the purpose of each character. It aids in getting rid of unnecessary details. Okay, that is huge. Sometimes we can get very lost in all of the details of a fiction story, because if you can boil down the entire book into one sentence, that's a lot of details missing, right? Or boil a whole movie down to one small paragraph, you have to cut a lot of details. Helping to do that would be identifying the character types. And don't mention the foils, don't mention the flat characters. You mainly only really need to deal with the protagonist and the antagonist, right? This helps in comprehending the implicit meaning as well. It helps you identify who is the round character and how they're changing and why, and what other characters are aiding that change and making that change happen. Very, very important in order to understand implicit meaning. So, the author's implicit message may be conveyed through a particular character's development. There's going to be a point to most fiction that you read, unless it's part of a genre that particularly strives to have no point, and there is one. We'll get to it later, but this is important for being able to understand. The idea of somebody changing could be the point. Remember the mouse from The Little Thief in the Pantry we did a few lessons ago. The little mouse, he gets trapped by cheese. First he decides to disobey, and then he falls into the same trap of the same temptation of trying to steal food from the people, but one time he grabs cheese in a little box. That little box was a trap. And the cook says, I'm going to drown him for sure. I'm going to kill him. And the little girl had mercy on him and set him free. If that had not happened, that mouse would have died, right? Well, the point is that the mouse had a very scary experience. He got out based off of the compassion of someone else that was unexpected, and then he scurried back to his mother and he never disobeyed her again. The idea is he learned a lesson the hard way. That change had to happen to little mouse and to change his thinking patterns, and so that he would obey his mother again. So the implicit meaning is obey your mother. You get that, you see that in identifying the change in the mouse, in the protagonist. What happens to him, what changes his mind. All right, so let's move on. I want you to watch this clip, but it is important to understand that this is an introduction to the main characters in a movie called Murder on the Orient Express. Very interesting movie based off of a murder mystery book. This is a very classic genre of books that are often used, and there are even some short stories like this. But this one was adapted into a movie. Now, I want you to know how difficult it would be to identify the motivations of each character without identifying what type of character role each one plays in the movie. I'm just giving you a short introduction clip. I want you to know how many characters you see, and I want you to know which two seem to be the most important in this scene so far. But which two men are the most important by time given to them in the introduction of this movie? We see several characters. Each has a different quality that has already been shown. Like you have a guy who's like a martial artist, and he has a temper, and then you have the woman that he loves comes up and she just like has a power over him and he stops. And then you have another woman who's older and she just can't stop talking and getting very personal very quick, which is a little odd. And then you have another older woman who's very stuck up and she's not satisfied with any of the booths given to her. You have a lot of different characters. So what two, though, are the most important so far? The man in the long coat who seems very mean. He takes medicine. The camera follows him quite a bit. We see him 3 different times, I think, in the section that I gave you to watch. As well as the man with the large mustache who seems to be kind, yet very, very important. He was the last one to get on the train. He got on there because somebody else just wasn't there. He has a big mustache. Later on, we find that he is the main detective in the story, and he is very important indeed. But very interesting that we see importance given to certain characters based off of the time spent on them in the opening scene. This is not always the case. In fact, we find that one of these men will not be there for very long in the movie, but very important for you to see. Okay, so let's get to a short story. Let's do some reading comprehension. This is going to be Mrs. Brill by Katherine Mansfield. What kind of character is Miss Brill? This is what I want you to focus on as I'm reading. Now, again, it's a long short story that I cut down quite a bit in order to give you a piece of it so you can understand, but still I think it's maybe 4 or 5 slides long. So use this opportunity for listening practice. Pause the video and write down words that you do not understand. It's a great way to practice reading. And if you are quick enough, if you are a high intermediate, perhaps you can read along with me. How amazing would that be? All right, let's get started. Although it was so brilliantly fine, the blue sky powdered with gold and great spots of light like white wine splashed over the Jardins Publicus. Mrs. Brill was glad that she had decided on her fur. The air was motionless, but when you opened your mouth, there was just a faint chill. like a chill from a glass of iced water before you slip. And now and again a leaf came drifting from nowhere, from the sky. Miss Brill put out her hand and touched her fur. Dear little thing, it was nice to feel it again. She had taken it out of its box that afternoon, shaken out the moth powder, given it a good brush, and rubbed the life back into the dim little eyes. What has been happening to me? Said the sad little eyes. Oh, how sweet it was to see them snap at her again from the red eiderdown. Little rogue. Yes, she really felt like that about it. Little rogue biting its tail just by her left ear. She could have taken it off and laid it on her lap and stroked it. She felt a little tingling in her hands and arms, but that came from walking, she supposed. And when she breathed, something light and sad. No, not sad exactly. Something gentle seemed to move in her bosom. There were a number of people out this afternoon, far more than last Sunday, and the band sounded louder and gayer. That's because the season had begun, for although the band played all year round on Sundays, out of season it was never the same. It was like someone playing with only the family to listen. It didn't care how it played if there weren't any strangers present. Wasn't the conductor wearing a new coat too? She was sure it was new. He scraped with his foot and flapped his arms like a rooster about to crow, and the bandsmen sitting on the green rotunda blew out their cheeks and glared at the music. Now there came a little fluty bit, very pretty, a little chain of bright drops. She was sure it would be repeated. It was. She lifted her head and smiled. Only two people shared her special seat. A fine old man in a velvet coat, his hands clasped over a huge carved walking stick, and a big old woman sitting upright with a roll of knitting on her embroidered apron. They did not speak. This was disappointing, for Miss Brill always looked forward to the conversation. She had become really quite the expert, she thought, at listening as though she didn't listen, at sitting in other people's lives just for a minute while they talked round her. Oh, how fascinating it was, how she enjoyed it, how she loved sitting here, watching it all. It was like a play. It was exactly like a play. Who could believe the sky at the back wasn't painted? But it wasn't until a little brown dog trotted on solemn and then slowly trotted off like a little theater dog, a little dog that had been drugged, that Miss Brill discovered that it was that made it so exciting. They were all on stage. They weren't the only audience. Not only looking on, they were acting. Even she had a part and came every Sunday. No doubt somebody would have noticed if she hadn't been there. She was part of the performance after all. How strange she'd never thought of it like that before, and yet it explained why she made such a point of starting from home at just the same time each week so as to not be late for the performance. And it also explained why she had quite a queer, shy feeling at telling her English pupils how she spent her Sunday afternoons. No wonder. Miss Brill nearly laughed out loud. She was on the stage. She thought of the old invalid gentleman to whom she read the newspaper 4 afternoons a week while he slept in the garden. She had got quite used to the frail head on the cotton pillow, the hollowed eyes, the open mouth, and the high, pinched nose. If he'd been dead, she mightn't have noticed for weeks. She wouldn't have minded. But suddenly, he knew he was having a paper read to him by an actress. An actress, the old head lifted. 2 points of light quivered in the old eyes. An actress, are ye? And Miss Brill smoothed the newspaper as if it were the manuscript of her part and said gently, "Yes, I have been an actress for a long time." Just at that moment, a boy and a girl came and sat down where the old couple had been. They were beautifully dressed, and they were in love. The hero and heroine, of course, just arrived from his father's yacht, and still soundlessly singing, still with that trembling smile, Miss Brill prepared to listen. "No, not now," said the girl. "Not here. I can't." "But why? Because of that stupid old thing at the end there?" asked the boy. "Why did she come here at all? Who wants her? Why doesn't she keep her silly old mug at home?" "It's her fur, which is so funny," giggled the girl. "It's exactly like a fried whiting." "Ah, off be you," said the boy in an angry whisper. "Then tell me." "No, not here," said the girl. "Not yet." On her way home, she usually bought a slice of honey cake at the baker's. It was her Sunday treat. Sometimes there was an almond in her slice, sometimes not. It made a great difference. If there was an almond, it was like carrying home a tiny present, a surprise, something that might not very well have been there. She hurried on the almond Sundays and struck the match for the kettle in quite a dashing way. But today, she passed the baker's by, climbed the stairs, went into the little dark room, her room like a cupboard, and sat down on the red eiderdown. She sat there for a long time. The box that the fur came out of was on the bed. She unclasped the necklet quickly, without looking, laid it inside, but when she put the lid on, she thought she heard something crying. Okay, so all that being said, what kind of character is Miss Brill? We know that she is an older lady, that she has a fur. She has a fur animal with its head on it, right? She shines its eyes to make it pretty and presentable, and she's dressed up. She's all excited to go to the park and do her Sunday normal thing, right? She's got all shined up. She's put on her best fur, and she's all excited about going out. She sits down and does what she does every Sunday, which is people watch. She loves to watch people. She listens to an orchestra band playing. She listens to people on the bench next to her. The parts that I cut out was just all the other things that she's seeing in the park. There's people, and she describes things and all these things that she has thought very well of herself, because she has gotten very, very good at predicting exactly what's going to happen and when. And she finds herself to be a part of this, right? We see here that she starts to call herself an actress. She starts to imagine that all of this is a play and that she is one of the actresses in the play. And as she's imagining this, a little boy and a girl come up, well, maybe not little, but a boy and a girl sat down, and the boy's pushing the girl to do something with him, but she doesn't want to because the lady's there on the bench. Miss Brill is sitting there. And he's like, what? That useless old thing over there? That lady? I mean, come on, why is she here? And maybe he's saying this in mean spirit so that he can make the old woman go away, so that he can have his way with the girl, but the girl is embarrassed anyway and doesn't. She also kind of giggles at her fur, which is the prized possession of Mrs. Brill. Mrs. Brill is so proud of it to put it on, and the girl thinks it's funny. So, really sad. So, Mrs. Brill hears that. She leaves. Instead of taking her usual treat at the baker's, she goes upstairs. She goes back to her room, and she takes off her Brill, her fur, and then put it in a box. And when she put the lid on it, she thought she heard something crying. So Mrs. Brill, she's a protagonist. She's a round character because she changes in the story. At first, she's just going out on a Sunday stroll, and then she happens upon this pleasant idea that she's part of a play and an actress, and she thinks of the implications of that to the people that do know her, like an invalid that she reads to, and the people around her, but then her lofty idea, comes crashing down, and she becomes depressed because of the conversation a boy and a girl had next to her. The antagonist is not the boy and the girl, though. It's loneliness, and it's sadness. The boy and the girl, they just said some harsh things in the moment and went on. They are not directly trying to attack her. They are not trying to stick with her, and they're not the cause of her change necessarily. It's sadness and loneliness that she already felt. And how do we know this? Let's support that. We see that the sad little eyes of the fur, dim little eyes. There's this idea, no, not sad exactly, something light and sad. We see this sadness. Miss Brill seems like she has sadness already. Perhaps depression, perhaps loneliness is already there. And then she gets caught on this wild idea, and then when that comes crashing down, that loneliness and sadness comes back. So, explicit comprehension. What does Miss Brill do every Sunday? Who hurts her feelings? Glance means to look at something quickly, and what does shake your head mean? Go ahead and take a look, pause the video, answer the questions, and I'll come back and talk about the answers. Okay. Number 1, she goes to the park to watch people every Sunday. It's her favorite thing to do. The boy and the girl hurts her feelings with their conversation. It reminds her of the sadness that she already has and the loneliness she already has. Glance means to look at something quickly. That is true. And shake your head means to move your head side to side as if you're saying no. Implicit comprehension practice. Why do you think the story begins and ends with the fur piece? What role does it play in the story? And what is the crying sound she hears at the end? It is old, dusty, not in style. Miss Brill looks to it as either a friend or as her younger, seemingly more important self. It's a symbol, is basically what it is. That fur piece that she has and she wears, it symbolizes something. And perhaps the way she felt so spiffy and young and like hot stuff basically when she put it on, it might symbolize just feeling young and happy and energetic again. And when she went to the park, oh man, she feels that fur. It's very close and dear to her. She almost feels like she could pet it and she gets so excited. But then the fur piece is what is basically disrespected by the boy. And then the girl laughs at it. And it reminds her that she's not as young anymore and that she is alone, that she's not a part of the play. She's not even a part, according to the young boy, she's not even a part of what is happening there, which is exact opposite of what she dreamed of being. She dreamed of being a part of it. She didn't dream of being the main actress. She just dreamed of being a part of the story, having a place on stage with everyone else. And that little boy's comment of, what is she doing here anyway? Who wants her? Shows that she is not, that she is an oddity, that she is an outcast. Hence the lonely sadness part. And so she goes back, and the first thing she does is take off that fur and put it in a box. And when she puts the lid on is when she hears a crying sound. I personally believe that this crying sound is herself, but she could be thinking to herself, trying to convince herself that it is the fur piece instead of herself, to just keep that distance emotionally so that hopefully she would not continue to be sad herself. Maybe she tries to personify that fur piece and just say, oh, that's the one that feels the sadness and the loneliness. I don't know, but that's up to you. And that is the beauty of short stories, is that you can interpret different things differently. Okay, so things to remember from this lesson. Identifying character types is important for sorting information to comprehend. Characterization is the process of creating a character, and an antagonist can be either a character working against the protagonist or a situation, internal struggle, or terrible event. All right. The antagonist can be a lot of things, so definitely keep that in mind as we read future stories. Next, we're going to talk about theme and setting, and we're going to keep going with reading stories and learning different things. So thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next lesson.